Morning, Dick. How's it going in Washington?
Washington is fine, Tanya. I was just telling John that we already have one attorney. It's already involved in that big deal. That's really quite a deal. You called it a structured, explain that a little bit. What's that mean?
So when you do a structured transaction process versus a standard sale, your typical sale is you're going to put a price on the business, you're going to go to market. You might put in biz buy sell or send a letter or something out to some targeted companies, maybe competitors, maybe private equity firms. And you're going to deal with those one-on-one. Somebody shows interest, they can submit an LOI or whatever, and you're dealing kind of with a one-on-one. In a structured transaction process, you're sending information out to a whole bunch of people, but you have you send out a process letter also that says, okay, we're going to accept indications of interest, and here's our deadline for indications of interest, and we're going to be taking questions in between then, and then you build a Q&A based on questions that are coming in from different people. You build that Q&A and make it available to everybody. And so by the deadline, you should have X number of, the idea is to have a dozen or so indications of interest, somewhere between half dozen and dozen, that you can review with the seller, and the indication of interest is going to say, well, based on the limited amount of information that we have, this is what we would submit to be a price that we'd be offering. These are the terms we would want, and so forth. And then that way you can narrow down from, half a dozen to the 3 or 4 that you actually want to pursue, that you think would be good buyers, and you want to focus on them, deal with them, and get an LOI that would be, from one. So different process, you're you're creating some competition between the different parties that are interested. It's more of and driving the price up. It's like, well, you're going to have to get your indication of interest. Hey, we've got that looks good. You're going to need to be a little more competitive than that if you want to move on to the next phase, which is, so.
How much do you have to vet your buyers? Do they have to be qualified buyers? That type of thing.
Well, certainly you want to, because otherwise you're not spending your time well. But structured transaction processes are typically used when you're going out to private equity firms. They're typically used with larger transactions. So you're dealing either with PEGs, private equity firms, maybe family offices, some search funds, possibly, and companies that already are in that space that have distribution channels that can capitalize on that acquisition, and so like, for example, I know that the guy that I'm working with on this project, he was once selling a gluten-free bakery. And so he went out to a couple of the largest bakeries around. I think Bimbo was one, and I forget the other one. And, he went to a few, but he only had one company that came back with an IOI. And so rather than saying, hey, submit your LOI, you're the only company, or anything like that, he just went through the standard process as if there were half a dozen people competing for this bakery, this gluten-free bakery, and ended up getting somewhere around 100 million or something ridiculous for it. When there was really, there was only one buyer that was interested in it. But he kept telling him, well, I don't know. Your competition, and they would even ask him, oh, did so-and-so bid on it? He says, well, I can't tell you that, but let's just say if they did, you may want to increase your bid a little bit in order to stay competitive.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So things like that happens.
Alan wasn't on when you told him, or mentioned several weren't on when you said what you're doing here.
Yeah. So it's fun. It's fun. It's just, it's a lot of work. There's a lot of detailed stuff that has to be done in advance. Because, once you start the process, like we'll send out we've got a list of maybe 200 or 300. And so we want to get it, since we're into the holidays, we're going to do things a little bit differently, but strategy wise, probably send out about 50 emails with the teasers attached, to certain strategic buyers, and probably do that like hopefully next week on Tuesday if everything else is in place. Then wait a couple days, see what kind of response, and send another 50 of the first email and follow up with a second email and anybody we haven't had a response from, and then follow that up with phone calls to make sure that they received it. And then, so it's just, it's a rolling process, but because we're in the holidays and all of that, we'll actually, anybody that we're not able to contact between now and the end of the year, we'll actually start over and send the first email out with the teaser again, probably second week of January, to those people if we haven't been able to contact them. So we just want to make sure we reach everybody. But it's a lot of work. A lot of work.